our overhead accounting parts include collection, classification, allocation, appropriation, right, and reapportionment. Okay, so reapportionment is the stage where we are reapportioning the expenses of service department to the production department, right? So there are different methods of doing so. Today in our class, we are going to discuss about the repeated distribution method. Okay. Now, in repeated, as I told, no, in repeated distribution method, the first part remains same. That is, allocation, apportionment remains same. The only difference comes from how are we going to reapportion the service department expense to the expenses of the production department. That's the only place where there is some difference. All right. So I again repeat, our allocation and apportionment steps remain same. The same method is used for doing till there. Right? And the secondary distribution part, there is a methodological difference with respect to repeated distribution method. Now we can carefully look at this question which is in front of us. See, already we are given with the primary distribution summary. Okay, the expenses incurred in production department. Here, in this case, in this particular example, the production departments are A, B, and C, and the service departments are boiler, house, and pump room. Right? So we have 5 departments in this particular example, and in that the first 3, that is department A, department B, and department C, comes under the category of production department. Okay, and the service department is boiler, house, and also pump room. Okay, so we got the primary distribution summary of A, B, C, and also our service department, boiler house and pump house. Now, as we know, we have completed with the primary distribution summary, and we are going with the secondary distribution summary. Okay, now as you know, the secondary distribution is otherwise called as reapportionment of expenses of service department to the various production department. That's where we stand. Now, in this particular question, we are going to do it on the basis of repeated distribution method. Now, what is the difference between the previous method and this method? The previous method was direct distribution method, and today what we are going to learn is repeated distribution method. In this method, we are going to reapportion the expenses of service department to all the other departments. Say, for example, if I am going to reapportion boiler house, I would be reapportioning that to A, B, C, and pump house. Listen to me very carefully. That's a primary difference here. If I'm going to reapportion my service department expense, say for example, I take the example of boiler house, that is 1,17,000. I would be reapportioning that to department A, department B, department C, as well as to the service department pump room. Okay, that is a primary difference which we will find in this method. We will do the same thing when I'm going to reapportion the expense of pump room. Right? In that case, I will be going with reapportioning that to department A, department B, department C, and to boiler house. Right? So this process is going to be continued until the expenses of service department is nullified or reached to a very minimum level. Very minimal level. It is nullified means either it is written off to 0 or maybe a very minimal amount which may be less than 10 rupee. Right. So in repeated distribution method, the process is repeated again and again until the expenses connected with the service department is almost nullified or reached to the minimum. That's why we call this method as a repeated distribution method. Okay, and now the next question you might want to ask me is, how do we distribute it? On what ratio we are going to distribute it? Normally, with respect to this particular method, in your question itself, they would have given the ratio in which that needs to be distributed. Say in this particular example, they have given that the expenses of boiler house need to be apportioned to A as 20% of the total expense, B 40% of the total expense, C 30% of the total expense, and since it is boiler house, here there is no apportionment. Right, so 10% to pump house. So this is the ratio in which we have to go with distribution, that is 2:4:3:1 to reapportion that to department A, B, C and pump house. Now, what about pump house service department expenses? Again, in our question, we can be seen that the expenses of pump room is to be distributed as 40% to department A, 20% to department B, 20% to department C, as well as 20% to department, to boiler house, which is a service department. But since it is the expense of pump house, we need not go with distributing that to the pump house. So the ratio would be 4:2:2:2. It is in this ratio we have to do it. So we are going to continue this process until the expense is nullified. I'll show you the answer how that is being done, but I'm explaining that at the beginning for you to understand. Now, there is also one more part that is asked in this question, that is, calculate the overhead rate per hour if production department A works for 4,960 hours, if B works for 4,800 hours, and C for 3,600 hours respectively. Now, overhead rate is nothing but the total expense divided by number of hours. It's as simple as that, right? So overhead rate per hour is total expense divided by total number of hours worked. So total number of hours worked by A is given, B is given, C is given. We just have to find out the total expenses, right? That is the sum total of primary and secondary distribution summary. I hope you got some idea of how to do it. Now I'm going to show you the answer. So the question is very clear. We are given with the primary distribution summary of the production departments as well as the service departments. Now we are asked to prepare the secondary distribution summary based on repeated distribution method. That is, we are going to reapportion the expenses of service department to production department. That's what we are going to do. Okay, this is the answer in front of you. Now, as you know, when we are going with the preparation of the secondary distribution summary, what we have to do is initially we have to put the expenses of or the summary of primary distribution as the first part of our secondary distribution statement. That's what I have done here. See here, total of overhead as per primary distribution summary for A is 4 lakh, for B is 3,50,000, for C is 2,50,000, for service department, that is for boiler house, it is 1,17,000, and for pump room, it is 1,50,000. Now, still, if you have doubt, how did I get the answer is in the question itself, we have been given with the primary distribution summary. Okay, and we have just put it to the secondary distribution summary. But if at all, if we are not provided with the primary distribution summary, then we have to go with the elaborate process of preparation of allocation, apportionment. That gives us the primary distribution summary. Then we have to go with the preparation of the secondary distribution, as we did for the previous exercise in the direct distribution method, right? But in this particular exercise, we are given with the primary distribution summary. So we have just put that into the statement, right? Now, going with our secondary distribution summary. We have to prepare that. That's what the question for us now. And we are going to use the repeated distribution method. So as we know, it's been given that the expenses of boiler house, that is our first service department, the expenses of boiler house need to be distributed in the ratio of 2:4:3:1. Now, what is this gap for? It is actually the boiler department itself. So there we need not share it again with boiler department. We have to share it only with A, B, C and pump house. That's why the gap here. So when I'm sharing the total expense, when I check here, I can see that it is 1,17,000. The boiler house being a service department, the total expense as per primary distribution summary is 1,17,000. So I have to nullify that now. So what am I going to do? I will put negative. Now, when I put a figure in brackets, the same thing you do in financial accounting also. Accounting also, when I put that in bracket, it indicates it's a negative figure. So I'm going to put 1,17,000 in brackets, which means I'm going to reduce 1,17,000 from 1,74,000. So ultimately here the answer would be 0 for me. Right. So I'm trying to nullify the expense of boiler house. Now, how do? I share that in the ratio of 2:4:1. So 2 here, 4 here, 3 here, 1 here. I'm shared. That's a basic difference which we will observe between direct distribution method and repeated distribution method. Here, I'm sharing that with the service department also. Right. So I got here. Right. Now, the second part which I'm going to take is I'm trying to nullify the expense of second service department. That is, in this case, it is pump room. Right. So when it is pump room, I know that the ratio, this ratio is given in this question. I know that the ratio which is being given in the question is 4:2:2:2. Pump room, I'm not going to share it with pump room because it's the expense from the same department. So the ratio is not given. Now I have reduced that 2:1:1:1. So the whole expense, that is here in case of 1,50,000, what you have to remember here is listen to me very carefully, otherwise you will have doubt. How did I get 1,61,700 when the primary distribution summary of pump house was 1,50,000? The only aspect here is I had distributed boiler house service department expense while sharing that between 11,700 was shared with pump house. While I was sharing with the departments, I also shared that with pump room. So accordingly, my expense in the pump room became 1,50,000 plus 11,700. So I got the total of 1,61,700. Again, I'm just repeating. How did I get this 11,700? Is the share of boiler house expense that is being distributed to pump house when I was trying to nullify 1,17,000. So I have to nullify 1,61,700. That is 1,50,000 being the expense of pump room plus the expense of service department being shared with them. That is 11,700. So it is 1,61,700. I'm going to nullify this. Now I know that I'm going to nullify this in the ratio of 2:1:1:1. That's why I have, but you have to see that has been shared with boiler house also. I'm sharing the expense of pump room with boiler house also. So the part of expense in boiler house would be 32,340. So I have shared that in the ratio of 2:1:1:1. So I have nullified the expense of pump room, but then you have to observe that there was a piece of expense which have again come to boiler house, which was part of pump room expense. It has come to boiler house, that is 32,340. So again, I will have to try nullifying the expense of boiler house. I repeat the same process. Now, how do I repeat? I share it with all the departments except boiler house. So I put the 32,340 in negative. So I'm nullifying that. Now I'm going to share that between A, B, C and pump room. In which ratio? I'm going to share that in the ratio of 2:4:3:1. Right. Now the same process is repeated again till the amount becomes almost nil, almost negative. See, here we have nullified the expense by sharing between production departments. But what you have to remember, in repeated distribution method, here the process is repeated by sharing with service department also. But finally, we are going to make that into 0 or near to 0 by sharing that with the production departments. So I'm just going to repeat that once more for you to know. Just listen to me, follow me very, very, very accurately. Because you might, if you are just missing one point, you will miss the whole thing. Just follow me. See here. We have the primary distribution summary, the primary distribution summary of A, B, C, as well as the service department being put here. Now we start with the secondary distribution. Now, as we know, in this case, the service departments are boiler house and pump house. Boiler house and pump room. Now we have to share the expenses of boiler house and pump room to all the production departments. But since it is repeated distribution method, we would be sharing with the other service department also. Right. So that is where we start first with the expense of boiler house. Now we know that looking at the primary distribution summary, the total of the overhead expenses as according to the primary distribution summary for boiler houses, 1,17,000. So I'm going to nullify that. So immediately the first step to be done by me is I'm going to nullify. So I'm putting this here in brackets 1,17,000. I'm nullifying. Now what am I going to do with that? I'm going to share that with department A, B, C and pump room. I'm doing that. I'm sharing that with different departments, right? So I'm sharing in the ratio which is already given in my question, 2:4:3:1. Right. When I'm sharing, I observe that there is one portion of boiler house expense being shared with the pump room also. So next time, when I'm going to nullify the expense of pump room, I will have to take the total. That is 1,50,000 plus 11,700, which will come as 1,61,700. So I put that in the second step to nullify that. Now, how am I going to nullify that? I'm going to share that with A, B, C and boiler given with an expense of 32,340, which was shared from the pump room. Now I have to nullify that. How do? I put that in bracket 32,340 and then I share with all the departments, that is A, B, C as well as pump room. That's what I did here. I shared with A, B, C and pump room. Right. Now, as the next step, when I observe, I can understand that there is a portion of expense that is being brought to pump room, which was part of boiler house expense. Right? So I'm going to nullify this. So what do? I put 3,234 in brackets. I try to share that between the boiler house in the ratio 2:4:3:1. Right? So 2:4:2, that is A, B, C, and also the final pump room. So that's what I'm going to do. And I continue this process. I repeat this process until it has been nullified. So that's what we see here. That's what we have done. So this is all about the repeated distribution method. So in a nutshell, repeated distribution method is a method in which we are continuously allocating the expenses to various departments, including the service department in the reapportionment stage, until the expense is nullified or brought to very minimal. That's what we are going to do in this method.